Actually begin our event with an exciting keynote presentation called Surviving the Storm: Strategies for Enhancing Cyber Incident Response Preparedness. This session is going to feature esteemed members of the Highpoint Networks team, including Dwayne Schell, CTO, Sean Mendel, Director of Engineering, and Dean Sheely, and he is our Senior Security Analyst. So get ready to learn a lot, have some meaningful conversations, and gain some knowledge from these experts in the field. Let's start it off with a bang.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, right? HypoCon 2023 in Billings, Montana. It's super exciting to be here. So, a couple gentlemen that I'm going to introduce in just a second. Super excited about what they have to say. Mentors of mine, security experts, true enterprise stories going to come out of this. We're going to talk about incident response, right? And surviving this storm. And not only surviving this storm, but kind of like thriving in this storm. And I know that's kind of a little bit of an oxymoron, but we do a little bit of incident response. We don't advertise it. If you go out to our website, you won't see any marketing or anything online about that. But we take care of our customers, right? It's all about relationships. It's all about making sure that folks sleep well at night. And after you've done a number of responses, you begin to see patterns in trends, not only in preventing an incident from happening, but while it's happening, how to get through that incident as gracefully as possible. So that's why we talk about not only surviving the storm, but thriving in it. Okay, so we have about 60 minutes of time. We're going to use all of it pretty much. So we're not going to have really a Q&A session. However, this conversation starts now, but at 60 minutes from now, that conversation doesn't stop, right? Encourage you to, catch me, Dwayne and Sean, that I'm going to introduce here in a second, in the hallway, right? Please get in touch with me after the talk today. We'll chat on the phone, we'll do a video conference, email, whatever it may be. But please, again, the conversation starts now, but the conversation continues from on and on. Lastly, I used to kind of be an engineer, was a CISO, all of this stuff was in your seats, literally for a long, long time. And I'd go to these seminars and summits like HypoCon, and I really disliked conversations or presentations that were fear-driven, right? That were 60 minutes of doom and gloom. So our intent today, truthfully, authentically, and transparently, is to not be fearful-driven, this whole doom and gloom thing, but is truly to empower you, to give you insight as to when an incident is happening, what does it really look like, and what are the tools and strategies and so forth that you can use to get through that incident in a graceful way. And again, we want this to be an empowering type of presentation where at the end of the 60 minutes, so that you have some tangible things that you can go back to your businesses, organizations, and schools with that you can implement, think about, strategize around, that are actually tangible and usable. It's not fluff, it's not marketing, it's truthful, and it's heartfelt. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce a couple gentlemen here that I really look up to, mentors of mine, if you will. We'll have each of them talk for a minute or so. We have Sean Mendel and Dwayne Schell. So Sean, if you'd introduce yourself, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Mendel. I am the director of our professional services team. I've been in this industry for over 25 years, and for the past 6, I've been a part of the Highpoint family. The professional services team that I get the privilege of serving is made up of Service managers, engineers, and technicians, some of those folks are here today. I encourage you to attend their breakout sessions and have a conversation with them while you're here.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Sean. And Dwayne Shell. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. Great to see so many friendly faces and people that I've known over the years. As Dean said, my name's Dwayne Shell. I'm our Chief Technology Officer here at High Point. Fairly new to the organization, so still in my first year, but having a ton of fun. Prior to my prior role, I served quite a number of years in the public sector. So my former gig was the CTO for the state of North Dakota. So not only does High Point have a plethora of database activity around best practices and lessons learned, I've got a lot of insight into the public sector as well, because that's an interesting industry that is pretty transparent with each other in terms of sharing lessons learned and best practices along the way. So looking forward to the conversation.
All right, awesome. Thanks a lot, guys. Okay, so we're going to talk about prevention for maybe like 5 minutes, right? Because we hear about prevention, detection, all of this stuff, all day long. That's pretty much 100% of our lives. And we're going to spend the rest of the time actually like, okay, an incident began, we're in the middle of an incident, we'll get into postmortem and all of that stuff. But Sean, if we can take, and Dwayne, maybe 5 minutes and just talk about prevention. So Sean, folks are calling in, have an incident, a number of years you've been helping out with these. Do you notice any patterns, Sean, as to how the bad actors get, let's say, like an initial foothold in the environment?
Yeah, absolutely. We look back at the last 24 months, there's definitely some patterns in the gaps that allow threat actors to gain access to the environments. And I really can break that down into 4 focus areas. The first one of those is having a process in place to be notified of and take care of patch management and making sure those patches get installed. Because way too often we've seen where threat actors are able to exploit those known vulnerabilities that there was a fix out there for that just wasn't applied. So that's pretty common. The second one would be how you manage your accounts. So account management, everything from privileged access management to multi-factor authentication, least privilege, all the things around, password policies, all the things around account management, making sure you're looking closely at how you manage your service accounts. Those are also very commonly exploited if those aren't done well. The next would be configuration reviews. So periodically taking a look at your firewall configuration, taking a look at your endpoint security solution configuration, making sure that those that there's no changes that have been made, or that there's outdated rules and policies in there that really are kind of leaving an open gap for threat actors to use. And then the final one would be network segmentation. So preventing that lateral movement once a threat actor does gain access to an environment. You definitely don't want them on the management network, like for example of your hypervisor infrastructure. You don't want them to be able to get to that level of the network. So having that isolation and separation, these 4 areas really keep repeating themselves over and over again the last couple of years of the incidents that we've helped with.
Yeah. So, Dwayne, Sean was talking about, I think, some pretty simple things, right? And I think the audience sees this and recognizes this as well. Identity and access management, passwords, patching, making sure that simple configuration mistakes are not made, that lead to an open door or whatever, kind of like forgetting to lock, the doors on your cars. It sounds like simple stuff, Dwayne, right? Doesn't seem like it's James Bond, Jason Bourne type stuff that the bad actors are using to get into environment, whether it's Citibank or the state of North Dakota or mom and pop shop or whatever it may be. It seems like for the most part that it's simple opportunistic things, Dwayne, that are leading to breaches and compromise.
No, I 100% agree. We like to think the movies show us all the James Bond cyber tactics that are out there, and don't want to be naive. I mean, we've got some over-the-top sophisticated actors. That being said, when we see the incidents, when we're actually helping people through an IR event, most of the time it's the things that Sean talked about. It's simple stuff, right? Yeah. Vulnerability management. Everybody knows we need to do that. And an added twist to that is what I like to think about as asset management, right?
Yeah.
You might be really good at vulnerability management, but what about that device that's sitting on your network that you forgot about,
Yeah.
right? Those are the things that tend to pop up, right? Other things are just, a lot of them are just simple mistakes, right? Big event that happened about 4 or 5 years ago in Colorado had massive impacts for the state of Colorado. It's been talked about excessively, and at the end of the day, the root cause of that one, there was some sysad was building a server that thought he was on the test network, but happened to be plugged in on outside of the firewall.
Yeah.
So it oftentimes is those simple things that you're missing little details along the way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, if I could summarize what these guys said, we're going to move on from prevention here, right, to the incident in here in just a second. But I think the hopeful, empowering message here is that if you do your due diligence and your due care with the simple things day in and day out, that can a lot of times take care of 90% of your risk, right? So I got to get this off my chest. So I've been doing cybersecurity for like 30 years, and it's like the industry does all that it can to like overcomplicate the whole topic of security, right? It's like, keep it simple, folks, right? If system has a vulnerability, patch it. Right? If you're not aware of what assets you have on your network, it's hard to protect what you can't see. If you have a firewall, endpoint device, whatever it may be, a technology that is doing alerting and alarming and all of this stuff, but you're not monitoring those alert and alarm cues, then, how much worth is it to that solution? I don't know, right? Keep it simple. I think that's the point of that message there. Okay, so Sean, take us into an actual incident. Somebody calls High Point Networks in the middle of the night. Take us into that first call or that first communication, if you would.
Yeah, generally when a customer believes they've had something happen, generally the symptoms are users report they can't access resources or data. That's usually the symptom that's reported. Generally, the customer will do some analysis of their own and try to scope, how big the issue is. Once they realize that they likely have some sort of major incident going on, they'll give us a call. And then once they call our dispatch team, we have a process in place for our dispatch team to reach out to the right folks within High Point. We have a group of engineers who have worked on many of these incidents over the years. And so we try to get one of them who's very experienced in working on these involved right away to kind of further define the scope of the issue and what's going on. And then from there, they'll contact myself or one of our other service managers who will step in and have the role of incident response manager. And then we begin to, when we get a report back that, yes, we have a major incident here, then we begin to look internally at resources that we can bring together. We have a number of engineers with different disciplines that all come together to work on this together, and so we start to gather them together and get those folks involved so that we can continue the process of taking care of this.
Absolutely. Dwayne, can you comment on how important just flat out communication is throughout the entire incident response engagement? So, we just asked Sean, get a call in the middle of the night. If my daughter, for example, gets in a car accident, she just knows she has to do kind of like one thing, right? Let's say it's kind of a significant car accident. She picks up the phone and she dials a number, right? Or any type of emergency, you dial a number. That's how it all begins. It all begins with communication. She dials 911, point blank, full stop. That's it. So to kick off that communication process, right, folks, if you don't have an incident response plan, right, after today, go home, get out a blank sheet of paper, right, corporation, whatever, incident response plan. Step one is, what is your 911? Who is your 911? So Dwayne, can you talk about how important communications are, especially that initial one?
Well, as we think about some best practices, right, the communications is clearly at the top of the list. But But as we think about surviving the storm, and as it relates to communications, I like to kind of touch on the things that people tend to miss, right? Because once this thing starts, you want to make sure all your key stakeholders are engaged, right? It's not just IT, it's not just cyber. You're bringing the business in because this is a business impact event in a major, major way. So you need your business leaders, you need your crisis management leaders, you need your partners coming in, and you got to be able to communicate across the board. What people oftentimes miss is the fact that this event may very well have compromised your corporate communications capabilities, right? So it's easy to say, all right, I've got a corporate voice system, I've got all the email, I've got my chat, but if the bad actor has compromised all those, what is your plan B communications mechanisms in place, right? And that actually catches people on surprise quite oftentimes because maybe they don't know everybody's cell phone number or non-work email number, and how are we going to keep in touch with these people so that we can have conversations that are appropriate, right? Do you know who your insurance company is?
Yeah.
Do you know how to get a hold of them, right? If that plan is tied up in ransomware on the file server and been encrypted,
Yeah.
how do you get a hold of your insurance company, right? So all kinds of entertaining things that you really need to think through the communications process.
Absolutely, and again, I think about my, daughters maybe having a car accident. The communication. Who does she call? Number one, 911. Got to call mom and dad, of course. But then number two, it would be like your car accident also becomes an insurance event, also maybe at the same time. So, like Dwayne said, we're going to maybe get your technology partner involved right off the bat. Why? Because they probably have access to your environment quickly. They know your environment better than any other third party that's out there. So you want to get them engaged quickly. I don't care if it's High Point Networks or whoever you're currently with, do that. But then, like Dwayne said, be familiar with, your insurance policy, have a hard copy of that, know their phone number and so forth, who to call. So Sean, if you can bring us back to the situation, customers called in, they have an event, our first responders are in there, they're doing an analysis, scoping, trying to contain the event, but then in parallel, more people are brought into the situation. And one of those ultimately usually is the insurance company. Can you kind of bring us into that situation?
Yeah, sure. So kind of picking up where I left off, what we have our key players involved. We have an incident response manager on the High Point side who is engaged, and from there we then begin to communicate with the customer, and we start the communication process. And so one of the first things we'll do is spin up an external communication bridge of some sort, and then we'll start gathering personal email addresses and cell phone numbers from the customer side, and then we will. After that, once that's set up, the next thing we have them do is call their insurance company if they haven't done so already. So we'll have them give them a call because that starts another process that takes time. So with an insurance company who knows what they're doing, I'll say, with this, generally you can expect an all-hands type call meeting within 90 minutes. However, we have had situations where that took 48 hours. So you can imagine the impact that has when time is so important now, that you'd rather have a 90-minute call spun up than 48 hours later. So getting the insurance company involved right away does then kick off some other involvement from other organizations. So the insurance company will bring in a forensics team. They'll bring in a law firm at a minimum. And so here now we've got already 5 organizations involved. We've got the High Point team, the customer, the insurance company, the lawyers, and also the forensics team. So now we've got this all hands meeting going, and then we define our next steps from there.
Right. So Dwayne, back to that, okay, maybe we don't have an incident response plan. You take out the blank sheet of paper. Step 1 is kind of like, what is your 911? Step 2 is, who's your insurance company, your insurance provider. And then, Dwayne, if you could hit on insurance for a little bit here, as you and I have talked about, offline, to be familiar with that policy, right? Kind of make sure that you're not doing anything to invalidate the policy, so forth, and
Yeah, no, that's super critical. So maybe just real quick, how many folks have cyber insurance? Lots of hands go up. That's great. How many people know where it's at? Less hands go up. Is it on the file server? And will it be encrypted during the ransomware event so that you can even access it? And do you have a backup copy? Last question, how many people have actually read your insurance policy? Very few hands. As cyber insurance continues to evolve, right, we all know premiums have gone up exponentially, right? Why is that? We're having lots of events. The industry is evolving, and there are more and more and more constraints within your insurance policy. So to me, step one is know where your policy is at, know who the contacts are, and actually understand what are the constraints that exist within your policy, because the last thing you want to do is one of the first actions you take invalidates your policy, right? So are you following the steps that exist in there so that the insurance policy will actually cover you when things happen?
hey, I'm taking some notes, folks. Is that okay? Now, I'm not Joe Rogan. I can't do this by memory, so hold on a second. Right, so Sean, we're going to talk one last question about insurance, and then we're going to move on. But Sean, you've seen, insurance companies, policy providers get involved, pretty much every time, and you've seen some really good companies, insurance companies, where they have a forensics team that is on the ball, they're mature, and all of this other stuff. But take us into that situation where it maybe hasn't turned out so well, that it's questionable. There can be some, some friction, if you want to put it that way, that maybe the A team isn't showing up and all this other stuff,
Yeah, we've seen it all across the board. Going back to when I talked about it earlier, the 90 minutes versus the 48 hours, I mean, that's the first step. That's a huge red flag if things aren't getting kicked off quickly. And then, second, the insurance companies are going to bring in other organizations like the law firms and the forensics teams that they have relationships with that they're going to bring in. Checking your policy to make sure, see if you have to accept who they bring in, or do you have your own relationships, looking at that. Because we have seen the A team when it comes to forensics, and we've seen the D team as well. We've seen it across the board where they might as well not even be there. They just were not helpful, and it really got us nowhere. So we've seen all that. So kind of just, check, again, it goes back to your insurance policy, understanding it, knowing who they're going to bring in and what you can expect if you find yourself with a major incident happening.
Yeah, and I think if you, recognizing one theme, coming from Sean, but specifically Dwayne also, it's like, do as many things as you can ahead of time. Specifically in regards to insurance, do a tabletop exercise, do a fire drill, whatever you want to call it, ahead of time, where you call your insurance provider and say, hey, we're just going through an exercise, pretend that we have a ransomware situation, AIG or whoever you're calling, right, the Hartford. And okay, so we have this situation, now what do we do? And if your insurance provider is on the ball, they'll say, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get, this firm engaged, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, kick off, boom, 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 you're off and running. But you might have an insurance provider that just kind of goes, I don't know. But it's good to have that conversation, that exercise ahead of time as to in the middle of the storm, right? So, any theme coming from Dwayne is make all these decisions ahead of time if you can. Dwayne, you talked about having, some physical copies of things, physical copies of your insurance policy, physical copies of this, that, and the other thing. But the whole spirit of that is around data, and data is being encrypted. And I think if there's one thing that I've observed, especially in a ransomware situation, is like there's always one question that's always asked eventually. And that question is, what happened to the data, right? That's what folks ultimately, I think, at the end of the day are kind of concerned with. And Dwayne, could you kind of hit on, like, if data has been recognized to have been compromised and or exfiltrated, it kind of takes the incident from, one level to a completely different level, right? There might be statutory obligations, regulatory obligations. So could you just kind of talk about, data and its role in some type of compromise, Dwayne?
Yeah, so when you think about data, right, at the end of the day, almost every time the bad actor is after some kind of data, right? Sometimes they're looking to disrupt, obviously, but lots of times they're after the data. And so one of the first questions is, okay, we've got an event. Did we have data exfil, right? So lots of ways to figure that out, assuming you've got the technologies and logging and things in place. But once you understand that data has left, everybody's like, okay, what data left? Because to your point, Dean, lots of us are in different regulatory and compliance industries that have all kinds of strings attached to it at the end of the day with those regulatory and compliance industries. But everybody almost has some level of PII and those types of things, or PCI and that type of stuff, which also has its constraints. So leadership always wants to know very, very fast, did data leave and what left? So everybody quickly goes into, well, we need a massive data governance program. And these are big, complex conversations, right? And so oftentimes people get overwhelmed with the complexity of a mature data governance program. But at the end of the day, most organizations have a pretty good idea of what data happens to reside in their line of business applications, right? Everybody's got something that's driving your business and you know what's in it in general.
Yeah.
The dark spot for almost everybody is their unstructured data.
Yes.
Right? So whether you've got a file server or you're dealing with OneDrive or Box or any of those types of technologies, when those repositories get hit, everybody gets nervous because nobody really knows what's there. So if you want to reduce your stress during a cyber event, cyber incident, focus your energy on what kind of data that you might have in these unstructured repositories. Because I don't want to pick on anybody, but HR likely has a copy of all kinds of human resource activity there. Accounting almost always has all kinds of interesting financial data. Engineers do their thing, right? Not picking on anyone, but everybody's got a copy of some kind of data that might not be best placed in those repositories. And so those are the parts that people really, really struggle with.
Yeah, and Sean, you've seen that firsthand too, right? Maybe it's, I interface with customers, folks, right? And, again, purpose of this is to be transparent and honest and keep the conversation authentic. But I'll speak with customers that are like, yeah, my sensitive data, maybe it's a hospital, it's up in Epic, right? Don't worry about it. It's up in Epic, maybe sales. Okay, it's up in Salesforce or it's up in NetSuite or you're at university. Oh, it's up in the Aleutian Cloud. Don't worry about it. It's safe up there. Don't be naive to how much data is extracted or pulled down from those cloud repositories and put on a PC in order for that user in human resources or finance or whatever it may be to then, manipulate, search, sort through that data in Excel or Access, right? Microsoft Access. It's easy to bring down, a few hundred, educational records, maybe that's grade, social security numbers, whatever else, medical information that's brought down. The speed of the network, the power that's on our PCs to extract, bring that data down, and now it's, down here on the client level. Now it gets copied, it gets reproduced, it gets moved all over the place. But the whole point of saying this is just be cognizant, like Dwayne said. I'm really passionate about this, is how much sensitive data can be brought out of that structured data into the unstructured type of data. And don't be naive that it doesn't exist there. So anyway, back to the incident response, Sean. So we've had, the first call, let's say the High Point people or whatever first responders get in there. They're starting to scope and find root cause and contain, spread, and so forth, what's going on. Insurance company is involved. Insurance company, we've used a couple different terms here, so I just want to get clarification on that. Insurance company often brings in what we would call like a forensics team. The role that High Point can play is let's just call it an environment or a network kind of like recovery team. And insurance companies can bring in a recovery team also, but then apart from that, there's another team called a forensics team. Can you kind of help us differentiate, contrast the difference between a recovery team and a forensics team, Sean?
Yeah, sure. That's important to understand too, because these two groups have different primary focuses of what they're doing during the incident. The forensics team is going to be looking for, indicators of compromise. They're looking for what data, left the network if it was exfiltrated. They're looking for the attack vector that was used. They're looking for all of those forensics type details. The High Point team, when we come alongside, our goal is to get the customer restored and running again. That's our goal. So we're working alongside the forensics team, of course, during this process, doing our part of getting things running again, but also being careful not to destroy any evidence. We also will commonly help collect evidence for the forensics team because it is quite an undertaking to collect all of that triage data to send to the forensics team. And so we're working alongside them, also helping out in some ways, but as we go in, our focus is when can we get these systems running again for the customer? That's our focus as a recovery team.
And Dwayne, again, comparing and contrasting the recovery team and the forensics team, can there be any friction between those two teams? As I'm talking about this, I always think about the movies where you have, like a crime has taken place, right? And you have the local police department and then the FBI is brought in, like in the movies, and sometimes they work together beautifully and other times there's friction, But yeah, is it always, sunshine and roses, Dwayne, or can there be a little bit of rub between those two teams?
Friction and rub, interesting words. At the end of the day, I do think the forensics teams and the recovery teams work very, very well together. That said, almost every instance we see a ton of, what's the right word? Friction is not the right word. I would say angst and anxiety and urgency. Business leadership is crazy focused on getting the lights turned back on, right? Because depending on the event, your business might be down, and these are not trivial events. So leadership has heard IT tell you, we've got good backups. We can get back up in whatever your RTOs, RPOs are. What is oftentimes forgotten is the days, hours, whatever it is, that forensics needs to take place before you can really even start the recovery process, right? There's things you can start to do, but in many times recovery is really checking all the recovery capabilities, are your backups good, all the other things good, while the forensics team is capturing information. Because this is critically important, because the other thing the CEO always asks, okay, are we safe now, right? And without that forensics activity and doing that well, you can't answer that question, right? Because after the event, or as you're trying to turn the system back on, 100% of the time, the CEO, business leadership, what's to prevent this from happening the moment we turn it back on again? Is the bad actor just going to do it again? So until you know what happened, you got to build that time in. So friction, no. Anxiety, stress, maybe not everybody understanding. We see that almost every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this may be a new aspect to our conversation that we haven't talked about offline, but Dwayne talked about kind of what's going on with emotions, what's going on with stress, what's going on with anxiety. And again, this is why you want to have a 911 number in your incident response plan, because frankly, depending on who you are, the size of your organization, the politics within that organization, really to bring a third party in, I don't care if it's High Point or somewhere at someone else, like honestly, I don't care, but bring somebody in that's level-headed, that's been through the storm before, that isn't making decisions based on emotion and politics and all of this other stuff. It's really in your best interest to bring somebody in that is kind of, impartial and is not being, emotionally affected in this fog of war, if you will. We were kind of talking about roles, right? Recovery team, forensics team. Sean, there's another unusual person that might be brought into the situation, assuming that it's ransomware. That's a ransomware negotiator. Can you touch on that quick?
Yeah, in many cases, the forensics team that's brought in will have a negotiator on their team, but sometimes they don't, and it's a different third party. And the role of that person is threat actor communications. So keeping that communication going also helps buy time. Even though there may be no intent to ever pay the ransom, the negotiators will still keep a line of communication going with the threat actors to buy time, if nothing else. So we have the chance for the forensics to get a little further down, for the recovery team to start their work, just to get, to buy some time so that we know the threat actor, hopefully at some point during the process, is been removed from the environment and no longer has access to the environment. So at least keeping that communication is going until at least we know we're at that point buys us some time. So it's a very important role.
And Dwayne, back to the data that you eloquently talked about a few minutes ago in regards to the ransomware negotiator. I mean, at some point in time, the negotiator is going to ask the bad actor or have the bad actor maybe prove, hey, bad actor, prove that you exfiltrated data. And then based on whether that's true or not, Dwayne, that might significantly influence how you're going to move forward. Are you going to pay the ransom? Are you going to try to buy more time? Are you going to do this and that? So kind of the whole dynamic, Dwayne, between ransomware negotiation and what the state of what's happening with data or valuable assets, if that makes sense.
Right. So the insurance company is doing a couple things, right? And I think that's a critical thing for everybody to understand what everybody's motive is throughout this process. And I don't want to pick on insurance companies in any way, shape, or form. It is what it is, right? Earlier, we talked about A-team, B-team. Every insurance company's got an A-team. When they get hit with capacity problems, sometimes you get the B-team or it's a C-team, right? So at the same time, when we're thinking about this negotiation process, the insurance company is all about managing the financial side of this conversation, right? And so they're thinking through the lens of what is this bill going to look like and how do we recover fiscally this business in the best possible outcome. The business leaders are sometimes looking at things through a slightly different lens, right? They're motivated to get back online, and yes, cost is a consideration, but future business continuity is really what most of them are thinking about. So sometimes they're willing to pay more for future value of the business, right? So walking through this and understanding the roles and understanding those recommendations going between these different parties are critically important. And it goes back to the kind of the communications and planning. Have you thought about this stuff ahead of time, right? Because oftentimes the insurance company is going to want you to delay any type of notifications to customers, employees, business partners, what have you, right? Because it allows them better leverage in the negotiation process. But what happens when your employees or your customers find out about it in a different way, that has a massive impact on your business reputation. So being thoughtful about what is your plan through kind of a crisis communications perspective on how and when you intend to notify folks is super important. The how to me is the most important thing, right? When you're sitting in the middle of probably one of the most stressful things that could ever happen to your business, you really don't want to be making up your communication on the fly. Because, odds are you're not going to be happy with that version that you built in the heat of the fire.
Again, strategies, and you'll hear this from, Dwayne all day long, is like if you can plan those communications, not only how are you going to communicate, but what are you going to say to whom and at what time, if you can prepare that ahead of time. I think that's kind of in the spirit of what, Dwayne and Sean are saying here, kind of like all day long. Sean, one last thing, and then we'll get into recovery here and postmortem and all of that stuff. But again, to keep it transparent and honest with the audience today, here in-house and online, do you ever see a situation where businesses, organizations actually pay the ransom?
We don't see it very often.
Yeah.
It seems to be pretty rare, thankfully, because of course, the more ransoms that are paid, the more this activity is encouraged. But it's also there's really two parts to most ransomware. We've talked about it already, the data exfiltration. So the ransom request is not only to decrypt the data you have on your infrastructure, but also to prevent the threat actor from selling or posting that data that they've exfiltrated. So it really becomes a business decision at that point. And sometimes we're not necessarily involved in that. But from what we know and from the instance we've been part of, ransoms are paid very seldom.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dwayne, really quick, we don't spend a lot of time on this, maybe just 20, 30 seconds, but we're almost seeing a new dimension of ransomware in order to encourage the victim to pay the ransom, right? So like dimension 1 is, right, you encrypt the data. Dimension 2 is, exfiltrate the data. Maybe dimension 3 is you threaten to publish this data publicly on the internet or whatever. But Dwayne, we're kind of starting to see maybe this fourth dimension, not very often, but it's happening, where sensitive data is stolen, and then motivation might be for the bad actor to communicate with the business's constituent. Maybe that's a patient, maybe that's the parent of a student, maybe something else. In other words, the bad actor is then going to threaten the customer or the constituent if the business doesn't pay the ransom. Does that make sense, Dwayne? Yeah?
No, 100%. It's interesting how this has evolved. We feel like we're following the ransomware thing pretty tightly through this conversation, and there's clearly lots of other types of events that can transpire. But ransomware is involved in a very interesting way, right? If you think about how this started, a lot of it was, bad actors targeting grandma, right? And they were trying to threaten them, and got their call centers and, figuring out how to convince grandma to send a couple $100 to somebody somewhere in the world, and that deemed profitable. Over time, they figured out there's a whole lot of money to be made in the corporate world, and so obviously the trends transitioned that direction and went that way. But about 2 years ago, I think it was the first time I saw it, and I thought it was just crazy and evil and ingenious at the same time. And the first time I saw it was in the K-12 community, where a K-12 school, I'm trying to remember, that might have even been a district here in Montana, if memory serves me correctly, the first time I heard about it. Traditional approach. Unfortunately, it got ransomware throughout the organization, threatened the school wasn't going to pay. Next thing you know, they're contacting parents of elementary kids, threatening them that if the parents don't pay, right? So they keep evolving, and so at the end of the day, clearly, we're not doing a great job in the IT community to do this, but it's a super simple way to solve this stuff. Encryption at rest, right? If you've got all of your data encrypted at rest, they might get a copy of it. They could re-encrypt it to make it unusable, but if you've got good encryption at rest, you can completely change this conversation.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Or if you have sensitive data that is not of value to your business or that you're not mandated to keep through regulation or statutory, delete it, get rid of it. It's toxic, right? Sensitive data, if you don't need it, it's not of value, get rid of it. Okay, let's move on to recovery here, Sean. So maybe two dimensions to, all right, number one, let's say it's ransomware, right? There's business email account compromise and all of this other stuff, but sorry, we're just kind of focusing on ransomware today because statistically that's what you'll see, okay? Okay, ransomware, three options. If you get it, number one, okay, data's encrypted, you re-enter the data, right? It's about impossible. Number two, you pay the ransom, really don't want to do that. Number three, then our option is to recover. So kind of two things, Sean. Go way back to the beginning, right? We have the initial call, the first responders are sent in, they're kind of assessing the situation. And thanks, Steph. So assess the situation. One of the things that you're assessing, Sean, is the health of the backup and recovery situation. If it's good, kind of leads, it opens up a bunch of opportunities. If it's poor, it's not. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, like you said, towards the beginning, when our team gets involved while we're doing the scoping of the incident, right in that same time frame, we're looking at the health and the availability of backups. Because one of the first business questions in this process, of course, is, do I have a backup that's viable? And that really can then change the direction of the entire process, because if there is a good backup, now we know that paying the ransom really is potentially off the table for good, but we'll still keep that communication going to buy time. However, if there is no backup and the backups have been taken out and you need that data to survive, that changes the direction of the rest of the incident. So we are definitely looking towards the very beginning, because the threat actors go after the backups. Potentially every time. Always they go after those. So once they've entered the environment, they are going to look for those and they're going to try to delete them. We even had one situation where they successfully deleted the backups. However, they went to like a recycle bin, for lack of a better term, and they were there. So we were able to recover them that way. So we definitely see them go after the backups every time. So back to our earlier conversation about network segmentation and credentials and all of that, just isolating those backups, using immutable, whatever it is to protect those is critically important.
Yeah, so just to echo what you said, immutable storage has now become kind of almost like it's not an option any longer, folks. It's kind of like you need a firewall, you need multi-factor authentication, right? There's some of those things that like you must have a place of immutable storage and immutable repository target for your backups is like, you just gotta have it. All right, full stop. Sorry, talk to me offline, about that if you need some help in getting there. Sean, what do you like to see? What do your first responder teams like to see in a backup recovery situation that gives you hope that a recovery process is going to go as smoothly as possible?
Well, ideally, we like to have backups that are local to the environment and not, across a WAN somewhere.
Why?
That for the speed of getting them back.
Yeah.
So if the storage solution that's being used has snapshots, for example, that are healthy and and not impacted, that is ideal because those are the quickest to recover. But if the backup solution is local and they're easily accessible, because depending on how much data there is, we've had situations where to copy it across from a DR site has taken 24 to 48 hours to copy the data back, whereas if it's local or a snapshot, it's almost instant. So we like to see that. We've had a lot of success with storage level snapshots that were not impacted by the attack and been able to use those to restore. That's the best case scenario. But I'll just point out though, even though we may have those, there's still an expectation of downtime because of everything else that's going on, the forensics and all the other things. It's common for us to see 3 to 5 days of what we call hard downtime, where things are not going to be accessible. And so you just kind of have to expect that regardless of what solution you have. I just want to make sure I point that out, of that expectation, because that's really common. But yeah, having backups that have not been impacted that are local is ideal.
Dwayne, to expand on that, I think this is near and dear to your heart, not to use fancy terms and stuff. I hate complicating information security, but if you can touch on RTO, RPO, Sean talked about, in any type of a situation, there's going to be a gap of time that sometimes folks don't consider where, data productivity is going to be lost. Data is just not going to be recoverable in, that gap because an incident has happened, then decisions need to be made, blah, blah, blah. Can you expand on that, Dwayne?
Absolutely. So hopefully all of you have an IR plan. Hopefully all of you have had a conversation with the business leaders around your RTOs and RPOs, assuming everybody knows what that is: recovery point objective, recovery time objective, right? Pretty straightforward stuff. At what point is acceptable data loss? At what point is data loss acceptable, and at how much time are you willing to endure to do that recovery? As we think about the reality of these events, what a lot of people always forget is the things we talked about before. There's a whole lot of time that transpires between when the event starts, when you're doing your investigation, when you're doing your forensics, to the point where you initiate the recovery process. And so all that time, which might be minutes, hours, days, weeks, adds to that RPO and RTO type thing. And that is a frequent misunderstanding between IT and leadership. So if you can clear that up ahead of time, massively reduces the stress during the event. The other thing that is often overlooked is, again, as it relates to the forensics activities with the recovery activities, you can start doing recovery while forensics is happening, as long as you don't touch the existing infected production environment. That necessitates you need extra infrastructure, right? And sometimes it takes a while. Even after the forensics capture process, the insurance company, the forensics organization, even though they've got a copy of it, they want to validate that everything they have is accurate before they're going to let you get rid of the, delete the stuff and start that recovery. So be thoughtful about how that can impact that whole recovery exercise.
Absolutely. And Sean, it's in the audience, I think it goes without being said that there's hardening of the environment, there's corrections of gaps and so forth that are taking place in real time as the recovery is happening, right? There's kind of this real-time hardening, and then I'd almost would say like tactical, and then long-term kind of strategic. And the forensics team, sometimes they bring in some tools or whatever to add visibility to indicators of compromise if things are still happening. Can you expand on that a little bit?
During the recovery process, if the forensics teams, they have their choice of tools they like to use. If the tool that they like is already deployed, if it's one that they like to run, then they'll generally take over that. They'll take over the management of that during the incident recovery process. If they don't like what's currently deployed, they will replace it with one that they do like, and then they will manage that throughout the recovery process. Which generally is, it's weeks, right? By the time the forensics that Dwayne was talking about gets done, it's generally a 3 weeks at least before they validate the data they've collected, and they're good to go for us to, start to destroy the encrypted systems that exist. So it's a process.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. So, we'll assume the recovery takes place, that the recovery is successful. Sean suggested or has observed that there can be maybe 3 to 5 days of kind of hard downtime, again, if it's a significant ransomware event. maybe 3 or 4 weeks of, let's call it like a lingering kind of degraded type of situation that you might be in until you're fully back to normal, kind of business as usual. And then we go into what we call like the post-mortem phase or the lessons learned phase, right? That is, absolutely critical that we come back after the event. We do an analysis of what, initially happened to allow the compromise to take place. How did the recovery process go? How do we tweak our incident response plan, right? Then we go into kind of that, let's call it tactical correction where, okay, now we got to put right after the event, right? We got to put multi-factor auth in place. We have to do real-time patch management. We need to do, 360-degree visibility, eyes on glass, 24/7, 365, and then into, more strategic stuff. It's how do we move forward with a formal information security program, risk management program, third-party risk, all of this stuff. So that's kind of the whole, globally of the whole incident process, folks. And the reason I'm kind of rushing here is that we're out of time. How much time do we have, Tiff?
10 minutes.
Oh, we do. Oh, great. Okay. So Sean, can you bring us into, specifically what some of that hardening might look like? Sometimes the forensics team brings in their own tool again to make sure that indicators of compromise aren't continuing in order the recovery can take place. And
Yeah, that's really common. We also do is we'll try to bring back things better than they were. So if, for example, an easy example is if multi-factor authentication was not deployed prior, then as we're doing the recovery, we will deploy that. We'll make that a part of the recovery process because it wasn't there before. That's one of the common ones because the management of accounts is generally sometimes not done well, and that was turned out to be the attack vector. So we'll put things back by adding those things as we go. Also, if there was known vulnerabilities of a certain OS or what was ever being used, we'll try to bring back newer versions that are patched, and so we'll not put back the versions that have the vulnerability. So we try to, when we restore things, really think through, how can we make this better to prevent the attack from reoccurring again?
Absolutely. And Dwayne, I think this is near and dear to your heart, but in regards to hardening the environment, putting that stake in the ground and saying, okay, from this point forward, we're now going to take this approach or adopt this philosophy, near and dear to your heart. Can you comment on, zero trust, Dwayne, kind of assumed breach and kind of that whole philosophy?
How much time we got left?
Yeah, right. We need another. Folks, this is why the conversation doesn't end today, that it continues.
So obviously zero trust is right up there with AI as some of the coolest, fanciest buzzwords that are across the industry, right? Every product, every vendor has an answer to zero trust. To me, zero trust has nothing to do with the product. No offense to any of our partners. To me, it's an architectural philosophy on how you design your technology environment. And oftentimes, you can start down this path without investing a single penny of hardware or software and just using things you have. Because at the end of the day, I think the regrets that we see on any of these cyber events that were material in nature or very significant, there is some vector somewhere in your organization that allows the bad actor to go lateral way too far, right? So zero trust can manifest itself at the network layer. It can manifest itself at the hardware layer. It can manifest itself at the identity layer. Sean has mentioned MFA lots of times. Common practice, everybody's doing it, or everybody should be doing it. But then we've got a service account sitting on the back of this thing that has domain admin privileges with a weak password that can move lateral across your entire data center, right? So where are those lateral opportunities for the bad actors to navigate, and start simple. Just cut them in half, right? You don't have to go all in day one, but containing that blast radius, thinking about your technology stack is going to reduce the impact of an event if and when it happens, and make your lives a whole lot better. Because 100% of the time, when you walk through these postmortems, the regret is always, I wish I would have addressed that thing, right? As opposed to take the super sophisticated fancy thing and take it from a level 9 maturity to a level 10 maturity. This one thing over here is still sitting at level 0, and if I could have tightened that up just a little bit, this event would have been a fraction of the impact.
I love that, right? Conversation today started with like, keep it simple, right? The simple things that you can do to prevent the opportunistic type of attacks, right, Sean? We say that the bad actors don't discriminate, that they'll hit, every type of vertical out there, right, Sean? You've seen it in...
Absolutely. We do not see any discrimination in that area. Every vertical that we work with, we've seen incidents happen at.
Yeah, like manufacturing, online retailers, agriculture.
All of those, yeah.
Can you give us like some examples of what impact might look like in those different industries, like manufacturing?
Yeah, well, use the manufacturing example. As I mentioned earlier, those 3 to 5 days of hard downtime, that means nothing's being produced. So if you're a manufacturing company and your systems are unavailable for 3 to 5 days, then we've seen situations where the entire manufacturing floor of employees is sent home because there's nothing for them to do. So you can imagine the impact on that. In the retail, or a website that brings in orders, if that isn't up, then orders aren't coming in. And so that's affecting business in a crazy way. I mean, it's super impacting, of course, when you're sending employees home and can't take orders in.
Yeah, agriculture too, we've seen grain trucks that are full of corn or soybeans or whatever, and the cooperative, the elevator gets hit and they can't, weigh the trucks. I mean, we've car dealerships. It just, if you're a big pharma, state government, or mom and pop shop, it doesn't matter. And, especially small and medium-sized businesses seem to be a really hot area for the bad actors to hit because the human resources aren't there, the financial resources aren't there. Then a lot of times, impacting those small and medium-sized businesses might lead to larger fish, upstream. So our heart really goes out to the SMBs, and we think that it is absolutely smart for them to, to ask for help. As far as human resources go and technology, and I mean that's a whole nother hour of a conversation, right, Dwayne? So, guys, we have about 5 minutes left, so maybe a couple minutes each, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Sean, we'll start with you. Is there anything I missed today? Anything that the audience needs to hear that we didn't touch on?
Well, we've talked a lot about ransomware the last hour. Of the breaches that we've seen in the last, say, 24 months, that's been 60% of them have been ransomware. But there's other things that happen. We've had situations of business email compromise where a threat actor is taking over a mailbox of, say, the business manager and is now communicating with their customers and having monies directed to their bank accounts. So we've seen that. As well as we've also seen instances where data was exfiltrated but not encrypted. So we've seen those as well. And so in that situation, of course, the ransom wants to be paid to not sell or post that information online. So yeah, we talk a lot about ransomware, but there's a lot of other type breaches that we see. Business email compromise, simply exfiltrating data. We see those as well. And then we, in some cases, smaller, right? It was less impacting, where it maybe just takes down a single system, for example. So maybe it was a public-facing server that had a known vulnerability, and because of the network segmentation, it just affected that one server, and that's ideal, right? If that happens, it keeps the blast radius contained, and that's an ideal scenario in that situation. So keep the incident small if we can. Yeah.
Dwayne, sir, same question for you. Anything we missed today?
Well, obviously, I think we touched at a high level on a lot of the things we're seeing, at least through Sean and I's lens on what we've got visibility to. Obviously, we touched on Zero Trust, huge passion of mine from an architectural strategy perspective. Surviving the Storm, the title of this event, practice, test, right? 100% of the time, we see people stressed because they haven't practiced or stressed or tested enough. 100% of the time, we see people stressed on their resiliency, right? Super simple stuff, immutable backup, test it, make sure it works. I don't know how many people actually test the recovery process, but I can tell you as we help people through this, you can tell by the sweat on their brow when we ask about their backup, they're not sure. So build confidence and test that.
Fantastic. Folks, we're going to kind of end right now abruptly, but again, the conversation continues. I'd like to have conversations, with each of you, right? And we've all been doing this a long time. We've all seen different situations. So in our communications, no judgment, 100% compassion. If you need help with anything in regards to cybersecurity, please let any of us know. I would just love to help you out. So we need to wrap things up. And on behalf of Sean Mendel and Dwayne Schell, thank you very much for this time. Hope this added value to your day. And it's a blessing to be here in Billings. And hope to talk to you again soon. Thanks, folks.